children, how are you? Hope you all are fine and safe at home. So dear children, today we'll be starting in the Learn Well English Communicative English. Today we'll start a new lesson. What is the name of the lesson? The name of the lesson is Mr. Simple on the Train. It is a very interesting story about Mr. Simple. You can see the picture of Mr. Simple here and his journey by train. What happens when he travels by train? The name is given Mr. Simple because the man we are talking about is very simple and innocent. So before starting our lesson, write today's date 10-10 to 2020 and classwork. Today is 10th 2020 and CW. Now we'll read up the story about this Mr. Simple, the innocent Mr. Simple. Now first we'll start with the starter kit. The word simple have many different meanings as. Now what are all different meanings of simple here? In every type sentence the simple has some other meaning. As we say simple मतलब easy, which is very जो सरल एकदम होता है उसको हम simple बोलते हैं. लेकिन this simple word has many different meanings as we put in different sentences. Like don't be so simple, that means don't be so stupid. Here simple means stupid. It is simple question, that means it is easy question. Simple means here easy. He is a simple person. Here simple means innocent, एकदम निर्दोष है. Simple means he is not clever, के चालाक नहीं है, मतलब एकदम सरल व्यक्ति है. Then here he wears simple clothes, मतलब कि एकदम सादे कपड़े पहनता है, not stylish. Then be simple but not a simpleton. That means be simple means यहाँ पे sincere है, एकदम sincere मतलब कि जो भी काम होता है उसको एकदम अच्छे से लगन के साथ करता है. She is simple village woman, मतलब कि एक ordinary सामान्य village यानी गांव की औरत है. So all the meanings you can see here, there are different meanings of the same word simple. Now we'll start the starter kit. Now read the story and decide if Mr. Simple was simple or simpleton. That means कि क्या Mr. Simple simple थे या simpleton थे. So now we'll start. Now in the story we have to find that whether Mr. Simple was really simple or simpleton. That means he was foolish. Now get set. Once in a month, Mr. Simple went to see his old mother. He could catch the 10 o'clock train in the morning. He would spend the day with his mother and come back in the evening. He would come back by the 6 o'clock train. So there's Mr. Simple who is living in a different place not with his mother. His mother is living at some other place. So once in a month Mr. Simple went to visit his mother. Daily once in a month मतलब कि महीने में एक बार Mr. Simple अपनी मम्मी को मिलने जाते हैं. And he would go catch a 10 o'clock train in the morning. By 10 o'clock train in the morning he would go and he would spend the whole day with his mother, and then he would come back in the evening by 6 o'clock train. So one day in a month he used to spend with his mother from morning till the evening. Now moving on to page number 52. Often Mr. Simple looked very pale. When he came back in the evening, he couldn't eat or drink anything. Now what happens every time, every month when he used to go by train in the morning and come back in the evening by train only, then when he came back he looked very pale, मतलब कि बहुत ही थके हुए, tired. And when you're too tired, then how your face looks, that type of face Mr. Simple had. And neither he could eat or drink anything. Every time the same thing happened when he used to visit his mother. One day, Mrs. Simple said, "Dear, you are no good on a train journey, for it upsets you so much. Now, one day, what happened? Mrs. Simple, this is Mrs. Simple, Mr. Simple's wife. So, one day she said that a train journey doesn't suit you. It upsets you every time. Matlab, there's some problem. Upsets means there's some problem every time you do a journey by train. So, the train journey doesn't suit you. I know why it upsets me, said Mr. Simple sadly. I always feel ill when I sit with my back to the engine. Last time I sat facing the engine and I was all right. Isn't that strange? Now, Mr. Simple said, I know the reason. What is that it upsets me while on a train journey? Mr. Simple sadly said, because he was very sad because he was always having the problem after the train journey. So he said the problem starts when I sit with my back to the engine. That means when I sit with my back facing the engine, that time I feel ill. And if I sit facing the engine, if I sit on the seat which faces the engine, then I don't have any problem. I'm absolutely all right. Isn't that strange? Means it is something strange that when my back faces the engine, I feel ill. But when my face faces the engine or my face is towards the engine, I don't feel ill. I'm absolutely all right. I'm fine. मतलब कि अगर जब मैं इंजन की तरफ पीठ करके बैठता हूँ तो मुझे प्रॉब्लम होती है, लेकिन जब मैं इंजन के सामने वाली सीट पे बैठता हूँ तो मुझे कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं होती है. But dear, said Mrs. Simple, if that is the cause of your trouble, you can end it very easily. Then Mrs. Simple said, then you know the reason for your problem, then this reason can be easily solved. That means you can find a solution to this problem. Your trouble can be over. How? Asked Mr. Simple in a surprise. Mr. Simple was surprised. How can I solve this problem? How can it's a simple problem. It's not a Mrs. Simple thought that it is a very simple problem that can be solved easily. But for Mr. Simple, it was not an easy problem. He was surprised to hear that the problem can be solved. When you find that you are sitting with your back to the engine, you can make a simple request to the person in the opposite seat. You can say to him. Now, what Mrs. Simple told? Mrs. Simple told Mr. Simple that when you are sitting with your back on the seat, which is facing back, your back is facing to the engine, then you can request, or you can make a request to the person who is sitting on your opposite seat to change the seat. You can say these words. Now, what are those words? That I'll tell you in the next video. On page number 53, I'll read out the words. What did Mrs. Simple said? Will you please change places with me? I feel ill if I sit with my back to the engine. Now, that Mrs. Simple told Mr. Simple that you can make a request to the person who is sitting opposite. मतलब आपके सामने वाली सीट पर जो बैठा है उससे आप रिक्वेस्ट कर सकते हैं कि please change the seat because I feel ill when I sit my back facing to the engine. So how can you make that request? That will you please change the places with me? That means will you please change the seats with me because I feel ill when I sit in this position. And then you can change the seats and will be all right. And then that if person will agree and you can change the seats, nobody will say no to such small things. But I can't say to a stranger, said Mr. Simple. He was really a very shy person. Now Mr. Simple said that I cannot say such things to the stranger. I am not knowing. Stranger means the person whom we are not knowing, who is a new person to us. So Mr. Simple was very shy. बहुत ही शर्मीले. Shy means बहुत शर्मीले थे Mr. Simple. तो उन्होंने कहा कि मैं stranger से ऐसे नहीं बोल सकता हूँ. You can say all that if you practice a little, said Mrs. Simple. So Mrs. Simple said that you can say if you practice this for a few days, then you can say then next time when you will go on a train journey, you can say it easily. Suppose I am the person in the opposite seat. Just try and say that speech to me. Now Mrs. Simple started doing telling Mr. Simple to start the practice of these sentences or these words. How? she said, supposing I am the person that is sitting in the opposite seat. उन्होंने क्या बोला कि ऐसा सोचिए कि मैं ही हूँ वो person हूँ जो कि आपके सामने वाली सीट पे बैठा हूँ, and you want to exchange the seat with me. So you say those words. You start your words speech. Mr. Simple practiced the speech for full 1 month. He knew every word of it by heart. Now I can change places with anyone. And Mr. Simple proudly to his wife. Said Mr. Simple proudly to his wife. Now for whole 1 month Mr. Simple practiced the speech and he learnt it by heart. Matlab word to word he learnt by heart. It was fit in his mind now. So now I can easily change the places, he thought, with anyone. Mr. Simple was so proud of learning those few words. The day came when Mr. Simple was to go to see his old mother. He set off happily in the morning, but when he came back in the evening, he looked as pale as ever. Now the day came when Mr. Simple had to go to meet his mother. So in the morning he set off very, very happily, because he knew that if something like that happens, if I have to sit facing my back towards the engine, then I'll say these words and exchange the seat with my fellow passenger. But so in the morning he set happily from his home, but when in the evening he came back, he was in the same condition as usual when he used to come earlier. He looked pale as ever. Mr. Simple said his wife, "Didn't you say that speech on the train?" Now Mrs. Simple was surprised to see Mr. Simple as pale as every time the problem that happened, the same problem happened this time also. So Mrs. Simple was very much surprised that he asked, "Didn't you say that speech in the train?" "Dear Mr. Simple, I was quite all Dear," said Mr. Simple, "I was quite all right when I caught the morning train. I got into the coach and sat down. I began to feel ill because I was sitting with my back to the engine. A little boy was sitting in the opposite seat. I said to him, 'Will you please change places with me? I feel ill if I sit with my back to the engine.' The boy at once changed the places with me and I was quite well." Now Mr. Simple explained the whole thing, what had happened in the train in the morning. Mr. Simple said to his wife, "Dear, when in the morning I went by the train, when I entered the train, I was sitting with the back facing the engine only. But when I started feeling ill, there was a boy sitting on the opposite seat. I said these words, I said my speech to that boy, and that boy agreed in exchanging the seats, and he readily stood up and he sat on my place and I sat on his place. The boy I exchanged the seat with the boy, so everything was all right. There was nothing wrong during the journey in the morning. I was quite well." Moving on to page number 54. You can see the picture of little boy and Mr. Simple exchanging the seats. The boy has stood up to give his seat to Mr. Simple. "Then what happened in the evening train?" asked Mrs. Simple. "Did you sit with your back to the engine?" "Yes," said Mr. Simple. Then Mrs. Simple could easily understand that in the morning he exchanged the places, there was nothing wrong, but in the evening he could not exchange the places. That is why this problem has again arisen. So Mr. Simple said, "Yes, I sat like that." "How foolish," tried Mrs. Simple. "Why didn't you change the places with the person in the opposite seat?" Then Mrs. Simple became a little bit angry and said, "You are foolish. Why didn't you change the place with the person who was sitting in your opposite seat?" मतलब आपके सामने वाली सीट में जो बैठा था उसके साथ आपने शाम को जब आते वक्त क्यों सीट एक्सचेंज नहीं किया? "I would have done that," said Mr. Simple, but there was no one in the opposite seat. Now you can see why the name of Mr. Simple is written Mr. Simple. उनका नाम क्यों Mr. Simple रखा गया है? Because this statement tells that he was so simple and so innocent like a small child. So Mr. Simple said, I could have exchanged the seats, but there was no one sitting on the opposite seat. Now he was so simple, innocent, that he could not think of that other seat is empty, so that I can go and sit on that seat only. He didn't sit on that seat, he sat on the other seat in which he was having a trouble. But he thought if somebody will come and then I'll exchange the place. But he didn't. He was so simple and so innocent that he could not think of it that I can sit on the seat which is empty on the opposite side. On hearing this, Mrs. Simple began to laugh. Oh, my dear, she said, you are even more foolish than I thought. So Mrs. Simple began to laugh loudly because it is a foolish act of Mr. Simple. So she said that I thought you are foolish, but you are even more foolish than what I had thought of. मतलब मेरे सोचने से भी ज़्यादा आप जो है innocent हैं और foolish हैं. Mr. Simple couldn't understand why his wife was saying that. Now you can imagine how simple Mr. Simple was कि he couldn't understand why his wife began to laugh and why she said so, that you are even more foolish than what I had thought of you. मतलब वो ये भी चीज़ समझ नहीं पाए कि उनकी वाइफ ने ऐसा क्यों कहा कि आप जितना फुलिश में आपको सोचते थे उससे कहीं ज़्यादा फुलिश आप हैं. ये चीज़ भी वो मिस्टर सिंपल इस चीज़ को भी समझ नहीं पाए. सो मिस्टर सिंपल वॉज अ मिस्टर Simpleton. That means he was foolish. Rather than foolish, he was a very innocent person. I hope, dear children, you are not as innocent as Mr. Simple. And nowadays, children are not as innocent as we think of. So I hope you all have enjoyed the story. Now we'll move on to the textual exercises.